This is Ross Feingold on the Taiwan Hashtag program, coming to you from Taipei, Taiwan, hosted by Storm Media. We're back to discussing presidential politics and the latest polls for the upcoming presidential election on January 11th, 2020. And why is this episode called Playing Chicken with the Polls? Well, if you remember, last week we discussed how Han Kuo-yu, the Kaohsiung mayor and candidate of the Kuomintang, or Nationalist Party, called on his supporters to tell pollsters that they support his opponent, President Tsai. Why did Han Kuo-yu encourage his supporters to do this? Because his deficit in the latest polls has been falling, or I should say increasing, to a very large number. Some polls had him behind 15, 20% earlier in the fall, but now a lot of the polls are starting to show 25 to 30%, so a very large lead. So understandably, Han told his supporters, just tell the phone call pollsters you support President Tsai or you haven't made up your mind. Don't tell them you support me. So this will just scramble up the polls. It'll make the poll results unclear, unreliable, and maybe mask what is the true support level for Han Kuo-yu. I suppose when you're that far behind in polls and it's looking like you're going to lose an election, you try any tactic that might help your situation or at least help public perceptions of where you stand in the polls. So Han said, let's tell those pollsters that you don't support me. Say anyone but me. After he said that, the latest polls still showed a very large lead for President Tsai. So let's look at a recent poll from the Apple Daily, a large newspaper here in Taiwan. It shows a nearly 30% lead for President Tsai, the incumbent president, the candidate of the Democratic Progressive Party. Han Kuo-yu looking very far behind, 17.8 versus 47.2, so 29.4% differential. James Suongju of the People First Party looking pretty far behind what he got in 2016 when he got about double what he's showing in the poll numbers now. Now, there are some people who dispute these poll results. They say, well, you know, Han supporters, maybe they're too embarrassed to admit that they're going to vote for Han. Maybe, in fact, they did follow Han's suggestion and they're telling the pollsters that I'm supporting Tsai. That's how they try and explain away the big difference. However, the more serious analysts have other explanations. Right here in Storm Media, a prominent local political analyst named Michael Yo recently cited 5 reasons why Han's poll deficit is so large. He cited the disunity in the Kuomintang, especially after the primary that was won by Han Kuo-yu, but the other candidates in the primary, Terry Go Tai-ming of Foxconn Honhai, the technology tycoon, and Eric Julie Lun, a former mayor of New Taipei City, they didn't immediately support Han's candidacy. Although Eric Julie Lun in recent days has started to take on a more prominent role in Han's campaign, it might be too little too late. And Terry Go Tai-ming, for several weeks after he lost the primary, he flirted with running as an independent candidate until he eventually, at the very last minute, surprised Taiwan's political world by deciding not to. But this tycoon and wannabe politician who did run in the Kuomintang presidential primary has not endorsed Han Kuo-yu's presidential candidacy with any enthusiasm. And in fact, he's endorsing legislative UN candidates for parties other than the Kuomintang. So it looks like there is a serious level of disunity. A second reason cited was the inexperience of Han Kuo-yu's close advisors. Very interesting point. Why? Because this is a team of people who helped Han Kuo-yu win a surprising election victory only a little over a year ago in the Kaohsiung mayor election, which was a big shock because for many months prior to that election, his poll numbers were far behind his opponent. The incumbent party in Kaohsiung was the DPP as well. They had held the mayoralty for about 20 years. So it was a big surprise when this team of somewhat inexperienced advisors helped him win the Kaohsiung mayor election last November by a fairly comfortable margin. But it turns out that maybe this group of advisors are not really ready for a presidential campaign on a national level. And there is some disunity or inability to communicate between Han Kuo-yu's campaign as well as the Kuomintang headquarters, which understandably would also want to play a role in the presidential campaign. Another reason cited for Han's increasingly poor poll performance was a failure to really utilize the local election success that the Kuomintang had last November when they took control of the majority of local governments here in Taiwan. Several of Taiwan's largest cities were won by a Kuomintang mayor, not just Kaohsiung, but also Taichung and New Taipei City, as well as several of Taiwan's counties. But there seems to be an inability of Han Kuo-yu to capitalize that. So he hasn't really gotten the mayors or the county executives of these local governments to enthusiastically back his campaign. A good example of that would be the New Taipei City Mayor, again, of Kuomintang, New Taipei City Mayor, who was elected last November, and he campaigned with Han Kuo-yu last year. But this year, he's been very reluctant to campaign with Han Kuo-yu, only up until recently when he finally did start to attend Han Kuo-yu campaign events. So yes, that is a very valid point, that the local capability from the successful election last November has not been something that Han Kuo-yu has been able to mobilize to help with his presidential campaign. A fourth reason cited was the difference in just the people, the personality, and that if you look at Han Kuo-yu and you look at Tsai Ing-wen and you say, okay, one person, President Tsai, is very, very hardworking, very studious, has a PhD, and then you look at Han Kuo-yu and the DPP has been very good at casting aspersions on him as a person, and not just his personality, but rumors about that he likes to gamble or he likes to drink. There's been rumors in the media about extramarital affairs, rumors about how he purchased homes and where did the source of funds come from. None of these things have been proven definitively, and certainly there's been no proof that he broke any laws or anything of that nature. But it's had its impact. It's certainly had an impact as far as putting a question into voters' mind. Who's the more upstanding person? Is it Han Kuo-yu or Tsai Ing-wen? And we know what we're getting with Tsai Ing-wen, and she's considered a fairly upstanding person. She's not personally corrupt. So that has been a very effective tool, and it's not something that Han or his campaign team have been able to refute. And then the fifth reason cited was a lack of clear policies, which viewers of this program will know is something we've talked about repeatedly throughout the presidential campaign. Although Han Kuo-yu has a large team of policy advisors, it seems that the ideas and the proposals that they're putting out into the public space, which they do on Facebook, they do by broadcasting videos on Facebook or on the internet, holding press conferences, it seems like it's not connecting with the voters. And they haven't done anything to change that. So it's already been about 3 months that they are circulating policy ideas, but it is clear that in the minds of the voters that these ideas are really not taking hold, right? So when you ask voters, what about Han Kuo-yu's policy on any number of public policy issues, it seems like it's just not sinking in, it's not connecting, whereas President Tsai, as the incumbent president, she has the ability not just directly herself, but also her team, whether it's Premier Su Chang, his cabinet members, the ministers of the various ministries of the Taiwan government. They're able to be out there every day using the apparatus of the government agencies to explain clearly what their policy achievements are, as well as what their policies are going forward should President Tsai be reelected. So there is this ongoing question mark with voters. What is Han Kuo-yu's policies? So all of this indicates that Han has just completely failed to capitalize on the advantages that he had going into this campaign, because if we turn back almost a year ago to when the local election occurred, when the DPP lost very poorly, when President Tsai's poll numbers were very, very low, or even the various mistakes that the DPP or President Tsai have made over the course of this year. They're not perfect either. There were some scandals. The cigarette smuggling scandal would be one example, but that Han just failed to capitalize on the shortcomings from the other side, and because his own shortcomings, and we just talked about 5 of them, are so numerous that his poll numbers are where we
see these results showing that it's a nearly 30% deficit. However, as we talked about earlier, there are some people who doubt that the numbers are this far apart, that the gap is this big. There was a prominent media personality named Shao-kang, typically is more supportive of Kuomintang candidates. He's ran as a Kuomintang politician or parties that have similar views of the Kuomintang in past elections. He said that if Han loses by this large a deficit, by 29.4, as reflected in the Apple Daily Poll, that he will buy 10,000 fried chicken patties, G-pie as they call it in Mandarin here in Taiwan. So if you think that Mr. Zhao is wrong and he's going to have to buy those chicken patties, you should line up soon, because the election is coming up in a few weeks, and we have prominent personalities like this saying we'll be giving away free food if Han Kuo-yu loses the election by 29 or 30 points. So line up now if you're confident that Tsai Ing-wen will maintain such a large lead. We'll be looking at more polls in the remaining time to Election Day on January 11th. I'm Ross Feingold, and you've been watching Taiwan Hashtag.